continue with some great leaders that we have here. You will notice that our superintendent from Norwalk, Dr. Estrella, is not here with us. She will be joining tomorrow, so we will hear from her then. But today, it's quite an honor and a privilege here to introduce these two very distinguished individuals. We have Brent McKim, who's the president of Jefferson County's Teachers Association and who's been a longtime friend as well. And then we have our commissioner from Rhode Island, Angelica Infante Green, who it's always an honor and privilege because I feel like you always give great insight. And Angelica is also on the board of the STEM Leadership Alliance, so I want to thank her for that too. So with that, they're going to have a conversation about the education landscape and kind of continue our dive into this journey of learning. And get ready for questions as well. Don't forget to use the app for things, post pictures in there. We are gonna have a little surprise for those who are posting and doing certain things in the app and putting pictures up, so make sure you're taking a look at that. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to the two of you.
Great, thank you. So we're going to start by introducing ourselves, telling a little bit about ourselves. So my name is Angelica Infante Green. I am the Commissioner of Education for the state of Rhode Island. I've been there 4 years. Prior to that, I was Deputy Commissioner for the state of New York. And prior to that, I worked in New York City with some of my colleagues that are here. And my son actually went to District 4 schools. And so I'm really a New Yorker, but now I consider myself a Rhode Islander. And I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about the work that I'm doing in Rhode Island and the work that's happening nationally in terms of innovation. I don't know if you know, but there's a lot of change that's going to take place in the next 2 years. And you heard a lot about CTE. So one of the things that it's really important for you to keep in mind is that this new generation really wants to innovate, and we have to start changing the way that we're teaching. So in my current role, I oversee the state, but I also took over 3 years ago Providence School District. It was one of the lowest performing in the nation, one of the most troubled. So I wear the commissioner hat, but I also wear the superintendent hat. I do both jobs. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that because in my policy role, it is my job to create policy that impacts change innovation. And what we just did in Rhode Island during the pandemic is that we actually took data from all of our schools, all of our high schools in the entire state. And it came back that if you were in a different district, you had a different opportunity, obviously, for instruction, for your outcomes. All the diplomas did not mean the same thing in our entire state. So if you went to school in a district like Barrington, which means nothing to you, but is one of our more affluent districts, and you went to school in Providence, you had a different experience. Zip code, as we all know, matters. So how did we change that for us in Rhode Island? A couple of things that we put in. The first thing is CTE across the board. And when I say CTE, we changed our regulations. I mean CTE for everyone, plus the diploma. You have to get both. There's not one or the other. You're doing both. Why is that important? It's important because you heard earlier today that there was this idea, this stigma about CTE. But the CTE that we're talking about is not the CTE of our parents' age. You saw earlier some of the things that you were seeing, and some of them, you saw cosmetology. And there's some of our students that want to do that. Okay, fine. However, then you're going to do a business program because it's not just about you being able to do these certain things, but you're going to create a business project. You're going to create food trucks. So what I did is I used some of my ESSER dollars and I put it out there and some of our school building authority dollars to give the districts food trucks across the state so that the kids can design the food trucks, what's going to be in there, and then sell the food across the state to maintain. So they will have culinary, they will have business, they will have engineering. So really pushing that agenda. So we first started out by incentivizing it and putting it on the accountability system. star-wise. Then we changed it to be mandatory. So that's where we are now, where everybody has to do that. But you can't start in high school. You gotta go deeper and earlier into it. So middle school, elementary school. So I talked a little bit about Providence. So one of the things that we're gonna do in Providence is create STEM schools as a way of really making that shift. I come from New York City. I thought that 13% of the population being multilingual learners was large. In Providence, it's 38%. So we're talking about almost every kid in the school comes from a home where they speak another language. And it's not just Spanish. We have a lot of Cape Verdean. We have many, many different languages. But that is our reality. So what do you do in a situation like this? What happens when you get kids that are coming in at 17 and 18 and have this short window? So we started working with a lot of the neighboring industry. We have Electric Boat, which makes all the submarines for the Navy. So our kids, when they graduate, are automatically, once they take the courses in high school, automatically guaranteed a job that starts at $70,000 a year. So those are the kind of partnerships that we put together. Last year, I invited all the other commissioners from New England, so Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine. We gathered in Rhode Island to really look at what can we produce for our kids? What are the things that our kids are asking for that we need? And what we did is brought in our kids that actually graduated and say, hey, what didn't we give you? What didn't we do for you? And what we heard very clearly was financial literacy. We were not prepared in math. And we all know math is a gatekeeper. We didn't have the innovation. We didn't know how to work together. What the industry is requiring now are a separate set of skills that we are currently not teaching our kids. So that's why we move the needle, and move the agenda to be able to move the needle. There is no better way to teach multilingual learners, that's my area of expertise, than through STEM. There just isn't. Hands-on, innovative. And the second piece that I don't know if you guys you're aware of, Carnegie Units are changing. How many of you know what the Carnegie Units are? Okay, so if you don't know, high school, seat time. Those are the Carnegie Units. You have to have a certain amount of seat time. It was created, I think, in 1906. Has not changed. Carnegie, we are one of the pilot districts. They're states. We are going to be changing that. So in our regulations that passed in November, we got rid of the Carnegie Units. So what does that do for us? It creates innovation. What that means is that our kids don't have to sit in the classroom to actually get the credits. The kids could actually demonstrate mastery in many different ways. So all our juniors in the entire state actually do apprenticeship programs. When they do those apprenticeships, those count as credits. They don't have to be in the classroom. What we learned from the pandemic was that we have to really innovate very quickly. So we put that in my role as a state commissioner, we put that in the regulations. And we have till 2027 to really change what that landscape will look like. So if you want to work in industry, if you want to work in a lab and get credit and make sure that you're meeting the standards, you can do that. You don't have to sit in high school for 4 years. Nobody has said that. So we're working with Carnegie right now and ETS to be able to measure those skills. And a lot of it is science. How do you measure those skills? And as you're measuring the skills and the standards, you're also measuring how kids, it's a little scary because they know where the eyeball moves and all these kind of things. When you're working in groups, that's being measured. How much you contribute. What does it look like? You don't have to be the one that talks all the time. But the new skills to graduate from high school are going to be completely different. So when you start thinking about the profile of a graduate from your state, what does that look like? And what does STEM look like for that population? That's what's happening right now nationwide. Those are the conversations that are being had. And the assessments are going to be very, very different, guys. So we have to change how we are assessing our kids and how we are teaching our kids right now. That means that we have to innovate. When I start thinking about some of the things that we've put in, this failing district, we put in 22 pathway programs for our students, meaning they still have to get a high school diploma, but they are doing cybersecurity. We're working with Google to create a Google Cloud. We're working with aquaponics. We're the ocean state. We're the smallest state in the nation, but we're called the ocean state because we have the most ocean land. And what's interesting about that is that the salmon have disappeared. So our kids are actually cultivating the salmon in our school system, in our high schools, and putting them in the waterways. That's what our kids are doing. When we're talking about our kids doing these different innovative programs, it is not for just those kids, it is for all kids. When the superintendent has their kid in this program where they're building robots to dismantle bombs that will then be used by the FBI, that's the kind of learning that we're talking about. Doesn't mean that you have to sit in a classroom 5 days a week. That's not what this is about. This is about really pushing the envelope. What is it we need? We are also very big on wind energy. Our kids are learning how to make wind turbines because what we want to do is guarantee a job for them when they graduate. The last thing you want is your kids not to be able to go through this work and then not be employed at the end of the day. And that is happening to many of our kids. So I think the second thing I will say, and then I will turn it over to you, will be that as we start thinking about how we innovate, we have to bring industry people into our system. It cannot just be teachers that have not worked in the industry really teaching our kids, because that is a disservice to our kids. And I know that it's kind of touchy for us right now, but we need to figure out, and I say touchy because we have a teacher shortage, but I think that we have to figure out ways that we are innovative in teacher certification. Because I don't know about all of you, but to find a high school physics teacher and that they are bilingual, it's like finding gold. So we have to figure this out. And it's not just about teaching what's in the books, but it's about creating, building. And the kids, when we put out this survey, we put out a statewide survey for all of our kids in the entire state, and it comes back to us. And what they have said to us is that the thing that they enjoy the most and the reason they come to school is the courses that are hands-on, where they're not sitting just in the classroom and learning and using a textbook. So we need to adapt, and that's where we're going. And we see the future of this district that have been failing as the place where it's going to be our proving ground on how this work can be different. So, and the other piece that I just want to say, for many of you that have kids in poverty or kids of color, we really have to reinvent our school system. Because guess what? It's never worked for our kids. Never. If a kid has to choose between going to school and going to work, they're not coming to school. So we really have to change the dynamic. And what does that mean? Can a kid go to work, get paid, and still earn the credits? Absolutely. Those are our limitations. So one of the things that we just started in this district, well, we're starting in September, is a school that starts at 7 o'clock in the morning, ends at 10 o'clock at night. You come in and out when you can, however you can, and we're not calling it night school. This is not something different. This is just how we're gonna do business. Because the kids, what we learned during the pandemic, I don't know if you guys had this experience, we had kids taking courses, checking people out at CVS. They are not going to change. Once they're making that kind of money, and many of you may be in this room, we have a lot of undocumented students. We also have a lot of migrant students that are coming in. They need to work. So how do we change what we do? And that's what we've done in Rhode Island. We've changed our regulations. We've changed everything to be able to blow up what we know as our current school system. However, maintaining rigor and high quality. And what we're trying to do now is do STEM from pre-K to actually our community college. So it's a through line across where they're coming in and helping us with the ability to be able to do this work across the board. That aquaponics we did with them. CVS is based in Rhode Island, so we opened up clinics in schools that our students work at those clinics that also see teachers, students, families, and everyone. You can bring everyone, and it's free healthcare. They're doctors, they're nurses. It's all in the system, and our kids work those. They work the pharmacy. So it is really an all-encompassing institution that we have created, and we're in the process of creating. So I think that that's really important for us, especially in a time where our system is so divided on what's important. And for us, really having our kids innovate was really important. We put out a challenge during the pandemic early on, and I will say we only went out for 3 months in Rhode Island. We were out from March to June, and then that's it. We've been in school. But what we wanted to do for the kids that were quarantined was, how many of you have seen those iPads with the pole and the robot and whatever? They cost $4,000 each. So we put out a challenge for our students to develop this with Lego robotics. We would pay them to do it, and then we'd put it in our school system. And our kids were able to do that. So we're really proud of some of that work. But what it really meant to us is that we're really behind in the things that we need to do. So that's what I share with you, and we're going to have a time to have some conversation and to talk about this together. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Brent McKim. I am a high school science and math teacher from Louisville, Kentucky. I am the elected president of our Teachers Association, or Teachers Union there. I taught 14 years in the classroom and was elected JCTA, Jefferson County Teachers Association president in 2001, and I have stood for re-election every 3 years since then, and I have continued to be re-elected, and I'm still serving in that role. It is a full-time role for me, so I report to the Teachers Association each day rather than the classroom. And I am the spokesperson for our members, and I represent about 6,000 teachers, primarily librarians and a few other, but mainly classroom teachers in the Jefferson County Public Schools in Louisville. So it's not a big, it's not nearly as big as the New York City schools, but if you take New York and Los Angeles and Chicago out, we're in the top 30 largest districts in the country. So it's not a small district, about 100,000 students. And we've been asked to talk to you some about the changing landscape in education, and particularly as it relates to STEM. So I want to focus on that. I want to talk beginning with STEM itself, and then some context in which that STEM work is happening, and talk about those changing landscapes. When I think about STEM specifically, I have to say, I think it is a good news, bad news kind of situation. The good news is, compared to even 10 years ago, I think there is more focus on STEM, and more STEM sort of work is happening, particularly in high schools across our district, and I think our district is consistent with many others in that regard. So I think there is more things happening in the world of STEM, and there are generally a lot better things that are happening there as well. I can give you from a Teachers Association point of view, just one indication of that is we were able, maybe 5 years or so ago, we bargained in a stipend. You know how you have stipends for all your different coaches, like football, basketball, and so forth. We were able to bargain into our contract a stipend for the robotics coaches. And then a couple years later, that was middle and high school, and then the elementary folks said, no, we have robotics too, so we bargained in a stipend for robotics at the elementary level. So that's just sort of an example of how there's a little bit more going on than there used to be. I think our district in Louisville is not unlike many others in that we have a much greater focus at the high school level in, I think, what you might call workforce development that impacts STEM, particularly with regard to the technology and engineering. So we have academies of Louisville within our public schools, and there's a lot of public school choice. So students can pick the high school that they want to go to, and we have a very transportation-friendly system to get them there. And we have different magnet programs that are housed in these academies. So if you want to be pre-med, or if you want to be, we have one where we've partnered with there's some manufacturing plants in town that include there's GE and there's a huge GE plant, and we have sort of like an industrial design where you design the kind of industrial machines that move all of the equipment around and all that sort of thing. So we have a lot of these academies of Louisville, which are like really popular with the business community, and we work very closely in partnership, which is one of the themes of the conference, in identifying what the needs of the Chamber of Commerce and the business community are, and working with them to design academy programs that align with their needs. So that's a very positive thing and something that we feel really good about. Those academies will have specific STEM programs. It may be coding, it may be that industrial layout design, it may be any of a number of things that are STEM courses. So those are all really positive kind of developments in that regard. But as I said, it's kind of a good news, bad news situation. The bad news about it, as I see it, is that rather than STEM, it's more like S and T and E and M, in that even within the academies, you still have kind of the isolated silos of academic learning, where the math is largely independent of the science. We don't have the cross-curricular sort of interdisciplinary approaches that ideally we should. And often, even in the same academies, you'll have the science class and you'll have the math class, and then totally separate, you'll have the academy class that's part of the Academy Magnet program that is whatever that focus is. When ideally, we would want to see a much more integrated way of having the teachers working and planning together and so forth to integrate across the curriculum, because that's much more how the world comes at people. It doesn't come at you as just algebra or just science. It comes at you in a very interconnected way, which is also, I think, part of the reason that we have such challenges with engaging students, because we create artificial divisions about how subjects come at kids that doesn't really connect to their real life experiences. So we need to do much better. So that's an area where although there is more going on, it's not really integrated as it should be. Similarly, when I first began teaching a long time ago, it's kind of scary how long ago that was, in algebra, we were doing like graphing on graphing calculators that were black and white. If you go into an algebra class today, the main difference you would probably see is that the device has a color screen rather than a black and white screen, unless maybe it's a lower income school, in which case they're still using the TI-84 or 85 with the black and white screen. So within the content areas, it hasn't really evolved a great deal, and it's still very siloed. So that is an opportunity, I think, for things to improve. I would say that at the elementary level, there are particular challenges with STEM at the elementary level, because a lot of this relates back to public policy, in that there's such pressure from high stakes accountability, particularly on reading and math, that often very little science occurs because there's just so much focus on the reading and math in the elementary schools. So it's really kind of hard to create interdisciplinary experiences there. Also, another thing, I mean, you may come to a conference about STEM, and a lot of times things are presented almost as if we just need to convince classroom educators to want to integrate. But I would say that's necessary, but it's not nearly enough, because if you have classroom educators that are convinced of the value of integrating across math and science, let's say, or math, science, and any other area within school, if they don't have enough flexibility with the school day and how time is allocated in the school day so that they have any time to plan together, then that's a barrier that's almost insurmountable. So that's a huge problem that we have to think very intentionally about as we design our school days. It's not just about kids, but it's about how do the adult professional educators have time to plan integrated lessons. So that's, I think, one example. Another example is often at the district level, districts can be, again, largely in response to high stakes accountability, they can be extremely prescriptive about what you should be doing and when you should be doing it. They have pacing guides. They have maybe every 2 or 3 weeks an assessment that each subject area, like a district common assessment that every subject area has to take. Well, if you think about it, it's remarkably unlikely that if you're trying to plan an interdisciplinary lesson between science and math, that it's just going to, by coincidence, line up with exactly where the science teacher is supposed to be on week 7 and where the math teacher is supposed to be on week 7. It's almost impossible to expect that to happen. So absolutely, we need to be sure that all of the standards are being covered over the course of the year, but these sort of rigid approaches to the pacing can really debilitate the ability to have authentic, project-based, interdisciplinary learning experiences that are engaging and very real world. And there are real needs for making sure that you're covering all the standards, but I think we need to think more flexibly about how can that be done. Another changing aspect of the landscape I would add is that I think we are in a world where we're like 23 years into super duper high stakes accountability as it came in with No Child Left Behind. And I think people are sort of recognizing that that was supposed to make everything equitable and fair and so forth by around 2012 or so. And we didn't get there in 2012. We aren't there in 2023. And so I think there's kind of a healthy, skepticism about that whole approach to high stakes accountability, which gives us maybe some additional opportunity to rethink some of these things, which are creating the incentives for the kind of rigid pacing and some of the other aspects of what we're talking about. So I see that as maybe an opportunity. So let me stop there and
let me jump in on a couple of things. A couple of things that are really important is that we control the calendars, right? So one of the things that we did with our ESSER dollars is really try to talk about how do you have interdisciplinary, but that has to happen starting at higher ed. Because our teachers come through a system where they're being taught things that are almost 10 years behind.
Yep.
Because our higher ed partners are not up to speed with what our teachers need to know. So when we're talking about interdisciplinary, when we're talking about really what does it look like, could you imagine a day where you're doing all science and having math be part of that? In the day that you don't have to say we're going to give 45 minutes to this, 50 minutes, that is our creation. So I have to disagree with you. I don't think it's accountability. I really do think, because accountability is important, especially when you have poor kids and kids of color, because nobody paid attention to our students prior to that. But I do want to say that the people that have the ability to change what that looks like in the classroom are the people that are in charge of the calendar, that are in charge of what it looks like. The Carnegie units will go away in the next 2 or 3 years. You have an opportunity to really revamp what high school looks like, but you can do that in elementary school, and you can do that in middle school. Nobody has told us, if you want to do X number of hours that you equate that the students will learn the standards, you don't have to do it a certain way. We have created that. So one of the things that Sal and Kelly are going to help us is to really look at our system from pre-K to 12 and on to our community college. What does that look like? No traditional schedules, really thinking out of the box, the day being longer, because it has to be longer. Many of us, you were talking about accountability, but I don't know if many of you know that the gentleman that was here from Massachusetts, Massachusetts is the highest performing state in the nation. And really, the way that they look at things is a little differently. And that's why we all got together, because we have to look at CTE. We have to look at what does it look like to have an industry credential for our students. If you are not, or we are not moving in that direction and understanding that that is the future, then we're doing a disservice to our kids. So I think that we have to be innovative and creative. I don't believe that we have to get rid of accountability. I think that that is, that's something that's a separate conversation, but I think how we measure what we're teaching does have to change, and also how we teach has to change. So I think those are the things that are right now being talked about that's in the landscape, because you don't have to. You could do your reading. We're a state that just passed the science of reading, meaning everybody has to, K to 8, has to have a reading license and know the science of reading. That doesn't mean that they can't do it and include science in there. That doesn't mean that it can't be all interdisciplinary, and it could be a whole month. It could be 2 months. We have made those artificial separations like you were talking about, which I think they're really important. But that means that we really have to really change what our expectations are for higher ed, for our teaching workforce, for our administrators. This is really looking at our system very differently. This is about outcomes in terms of kids being able to produce things. Last year we were here and we produced these like I forgot what it was, like moon modules. But it took us adults 3 days to put together these modules. And we were using every single one of science, math, we all worked together. And those are the kind of things that we want to see in our classrooms, that go on, that it's not one and done and we're going on to the next subject. But that's what's being talked about right now. We left some time for questions. Does anyone have any questions so far before we continue? Questions? You're what? Oh, okay, sorry. Well, I'm not looking at the app. But.
While you're checking that, I will just say, I don't think that I don't think we're going to, nor should we, do away with accountability, but when you have high stakes accountability on basic skills tests and mainly reading and math, that leads to a lot of unintended consequences. I think there are opportunities now to rethink that, where, for example, to give you an example of an alternate model to consider, in the state of New York, there are about 30 or so high schools in the New York Performance Standards Consortium, where the high schools in that consortium actually have partnered with higher ed, and they have the educators in those schools have been able to demonstrate that they can create and score assessments with reliability and the sort of meaningful scoring that is at least as good, if not better, than a standardized test. And so they are actually exempted from the New York State Regents exam because they validate through a higher ed partner that their locally designed authentic assessments can be used for accountability purposes so that their assessments are integrated into their learning, which lets them be much more project-based, they can be interdisciplinary and so forth, and yet they are still reliable metrics for the state accountability purposes. So I think there's some opportunities there to really rethink how we do that and move from a state-administered, just multiple choice kind of test to actually demonstrating that the educators at the school level have the ability to do that sort of in a reliable sort of way. So that's an opportunity.
Yeah, I think there are opportunities, but I just want to respond to that. Those schools, I worked in those schools when I was in New York State. That was never the intent of those schools. But I think that what is really important right now is that we have the opportunity to rethink all of this work without sort of changing the things that did work. So how many of you are administering state science assessments this year? A couple of you. So we have a science assessment that goes into the accountability system. So, and it is based on the science standards, and they really correlate, and what it does is that it really, really looks at the science standard, and also what we're doing is triangulating the math and the literacy. So we have the science, but we are triangulating the three of them to be able to have more of a holistic, to be able to get even extra points. So those are things that are really important. And for us, in terms of, I hear what you're saying in terms of literacy and math taking center stage, because it's true, in many places science, or social studies for that matter, take the back seat, is really making sure that it is part of the accountability system. And what I mean by that is giving even extra credit. So we have badges on the diploma that we just put in for science and for math, so that we are making sure that the students are really getting exposed and have the opportunity to take the higher level courses across the board. You said you had a question?
I have a couple questions here. The first question, how can we affect some of these changes or shifts from within the classroom when we are bound by different expectations from leadership that isn't on board yet?
Yeah, and that's why I said that I think the important part is that we have to train our leaders differently. Like if we're gonna change the rules of the game, everybody has to know what the rules are. Because I think right now, even now, we have different rules in different places. But if we're gonna look at this innovation a little differently, and what happens in the STEM classroom, and what the expectation is for that diploma to look like, our educators, our administrator, which are usually some of the ones that come along the slowest, because it is hard. It is hard to do those things. So that is really important that we all get on board. I would not recommend making big changes until everybody has had the opportunity to understand how it works. Because then what happens is if you have an administrator who doesn't understand or is not on board, as someone said, and then you have a teacher doing something in the classroom, there's going to be a problem. But that's why it has to happen wholesale with everyone.
And I would add, I think there are opportunities through district level policy to sort of, we were hearing earlier about if you change the environment, you can change behavior and so forth. I'll give you an example. In Louisville, we took something that was fairly routine, which is every 5 years or so, we would dust off the district strategic plan from the shelf where it was collecting dust, and we would update it and then put it back on the shelf and wait 5 years and repeat. But around 2014, 15, when it was up, we engaged with the school board, and they had some really authentic engagements in the community, all over the community, and we asked questions like, at the end of the day, what do you really value? What do you want your students as parents to come away with at the end of their 12 years in the Jefferson County or 13 years in the Jefferson County public schools? And then we ask, what do you think we are doing well and need to continue or do more of? What do we need to do less of or stop altogether? What do we need to change? And what came out of that, to make a long story short, was feedback from parents, teachers, everyone in the community was they wanted a focus on fewer and better assessments. They wanted to focus on deeper personalized learning and like project-based ways of learning that were more real world. And so we got that into our strategic plan, and then we've been working from that. And that gives folks, like if there's a resistant middle management sort of person, if it's in the district strategic plan, then you have sort of like a fulcrum to pry against to sort of move some. And that has been extremely helpful to us in helping to shift the culture and make the case. Like this is kind of our theory of action now. It's like focused on engagement. If we have deeper personalized ways of teaching, learning, and assessing, kids will be more engaged and the outcomes will be better, and that's kind of the theory of action.
Thank you. Ken, you had a comment that you wanted to make?
Angelica and Brett, thank you. I had one question. Angelica, you mentioned that you're starting to identify STEM schools, within the system. A little bit that's part of the plan. And also, Brent, if you've got experience with that, but I think maybe there may be some educators that are in that phase of thinking about maybe that's a good idea or bad. Would you take us just through how do you process that? How do you decide which schools and this sort of thing, and as it relates to the bigger picture and achieving, the objectives?
So when we started talking about those STEM schools, we had science, math educators part of all of our STEM teachers helped design what that school would look like. So it didn't happen in a vacuum. And obviously you need an administrator that has a background, that understands, that wants to think out of the box. Because we don't want to create these systems or schools that does not have that innovation. And I think what was exciting for us was that everybody realized that there was a need and that this would be one of the cornerstones of the change that would happen in the district. So that's part of what's happened. And we brought the families in, we had the conversation, and made the decision of what that would look like. Right now, in elementary school, we're also looking at what that would look like to bring cybersecurity into the school. What are the different things, maker spaces, actually creating a brand new building, tearing down pieces of parts of the building, creating it to meet the needs of what we're looking to have within our school system. Because it has to match. We have to have an investment. We have an opportunity, because we still have some ESSER dollars, to really think out of the box and use it for long-standing opportunities. I mentioned that our state has a science of reading. There are a couple of states that have math as part of their requirements. So the kids have, when you have reading here, you also have math. I think Alabama is one of them. There are 3 or 4 states. We're looking into it to really have that there's non-negotiable of what kids need to know in math. Like, what is the bare minimum for our kids to be able to get there, and how do teachers get the training in math? Elementary school teachers feel very unsure about math. Not all of them, some of them. And I think that once you put that into legislation, the money goes there. Because I think part of our challenges as we start thinking about all this innovation is that it is going to cost money. And we all have people that invest money in education. And I mean the legislature, the senators, our Congress people. How do we get them to understand that we're looking at teaching differently, that we're looking at thinking out of the box, where it's not just this rote way of learning? So I think that we're just in a great place for that to happen.
I'd like to expand on one aspect of what you were talking about. Particularly at the elementary level, there's some challenging things that happen with math instruction because, for example, some time ago, we implemented a math program in our elementary schools that was very sort of hands-on, very focused on construction of knowledge. It was a like learner-centered kind of approach, more inquiry-based. And they had a number of rich, authentic tasks that were built in for engagement. And we had Vanderbilt come in and look at how that was going, and what they found was that the classroom educators at the elementary level were actually modifying those engaging tasks to reduce them back to more like the kind of worksheets that we were trying to move away from, that were much more rote and less engaging. And so the Teachers Association, we tried to press to say, we need to figure out why that is happening at the elementary level, because is it because elementary teachers, many of them are not confident in their own depth of knowledge of the math to be able to go there? Is it because the pressures for coverage of content causes them to feel like, well, we don't have enough time to do that? Is it because they have low expectations of the students and think they can't understand something that complex, and so it's an expectation issue? You could go on, and the challenge is, no matter what you're trying to do, if you can't identify what's causing that those modifications to occur, then it almost doesn't matter what your district strategy is. It's getting unraveled at that level. So I think that's something that I haven't seen a lot of research in. I would hope that we could have some very intentional higher ed research into, and it may be, depending on the teacher, all three or any combination of the examples I gave and others, but I think we really need to understand that, because to be effective in STEM, you really need effective and engaging math experiences at the elementary level. And so we need to understand, why are those things getting unraveled like that?
Yeah, and I think, that's a great point, because we've all seen it, right? You pick curriculum, or you pick an instructional strategy, and then it's hard. It's hard to implement. And that's why when I looked at Alabama's scores in terms of math, what they did, I called the commissioner. I said, well, what did you guys do? And she said, we mandated that all our teachers, and they got paid for it. It's not that you had to go and get this training, but it's about 100 hours. K-8 on basic math. So it's not for just the kids, it's for the adults. You're getting paid to actually learn how to teach math differently, and how to teach math, period. Because I can tell you, I don't know how many of you are elementary school teachers, there's an area that you feel stronger in than others. So the state put in this law that everybody had to go through this training. And that's actually, it says a lot about what they value and what they want to put in, where they want to invest their money. So if you see that, during the pandemic, they were the only ones that, 3 other states, that their math scores went up. So it really shows us that we need to pay attention to what that looks like. Because maybe I'm modifying, because who knows? We don't really know why teachers do that. Sometimes you like what you were doing in the past better. But I think the way that we're asking teachers to teach, and we're going to assess them that way, because the traditional assessments are going to change, guys. They will be gone in 3 to 4 years from now. So if we're not making that pivot, then we are going to be behind the 8 ball for our kids. And I think that's the challenge that we're all faced with. And I think it's just an opportunity for all of us. It's an opportunity for us to sit at the table and really think about what will that look like. So please go, I just remember it's called the numeracy legislation. So a lot of states, 3 or 4 states have that. I know that we're gonna go into that in our next legislative cycle. Some other states are as well. But that's really important, because that sends a message about what's important in your state.
Yes, I have a question. I am a science teacher in a high school with kids that have learning disabilities, and you're talking about those assessments to be like, in the future, the culture will change. But I'm just wondering if you see also like a shift in the culture for when you go to college. Colleges just look at your scores, and our kids don't perform well with scores, but they perform awesome in STEM, and they have so much more to offer. And I just wonder if you see that shift going on from in this type of population going into college? Like colleges will be acceptance of that? Like, that's my...
Yeah, well, we're already starting to see the shift, right? So there's some schools that that are not requiring the SAT anymore, the ACT. There is a shift already taking place. And the good thing is that these companies in higher ed are working with actual teachers right now. And I will tell you, our differently abled students, we're looking at how they perform. So when ETS came and said, hey, we want you guys, it was about 10 commissioners, we want you guys to participate, I was very hesitant because they said, well, we're going to measure how kids work in groups, which I think is great, but if you're a child that maybe you're not as verbal or you're not as that, so is that going to count against me? Is that not going to count against me? And all that is going to be taken in, factored in, which is pretty amazing because they have the ability to do that. We just don't have the ability to do that right now. But they're really looking at how engaged the student is. It doesn't mean that that student has to be the one that takes the notes or that student that talks all the time, because you know there's always one that talks all the time. So they can measure the engagement level. They can measure so all these kind of things are particular for our differently abled students. That is really important. And I say that because I brought that up. I have a child, you probably saw my son here, who's on the autism spectrum. He is brilliant. Does not care about testing, does not, you know, that's not his thing. It's not where he's going to shine. But he can demonstrate what he knows in very different ways. And that's what this new assessment is going to be about. So I'm really excited about it. It's a few years out, but they're going to tap people in this room to give feedback. So when they come to you to try it out, please raise your hands, because then you can say, hey, it didn't work here, it didn't work there. Let's figure this out. I'm just excited that we're looking at different ways of actually assessing knowledge and proficiency than our traditional way that we have always done.
So we're about 5 minutes, so I guess one final question here. So we've talked a lot about all of these changes, things that are happening. How do people in this room find out about where those resources are, what's happening at their state level? You know, you both have extreme knowledge of going on in each of your states, but how does someone else sitting here say, how do I find out what's happening in my state? How do I find out more about these national changes? And even how do they get involved?
It's a good question. I guess you would go to your state department to give you as much information. And what I'm sharing with you, they're running a pilot with 5 states right now. The fact that they're even thinking about getting rid of the seat time in high school is pretty amazing. Not that they're thinking, they're going to get rid of seat time. But right now, your individual states have the ability to do that. Nobody has said that you have to have it the way you have. It's just been that way since 1906, when school was about the Industrial Revolution. We needed workers, we needed students to follow along, as opposed to really being innovative, being thinkers. I'm lucky enough that I've worked under now 2 governors. My old governor is now the Secretary of Commerce. And she put out, one of the other things that I recommend is that you look at the government's websites. The Secretary of Commerce put out grants for districts and states on working together on education as well as the job workforce together so that you have money. Because when we were in the pandemic, we could not get chips. So they could not even build the iPhones. There was a lull because we do not have the ability to do that in the United States. So that was a big lesson for us. And that's the things that they want to see, the Department of Commerce. And there's a lot of money. When I'm talking about a lot of money for school systems to move in this direction right now. So I would look at the Department of Commerce, there's money there, the Department of Education, and you saw the Assistant Secretary. So we're working very closely with them to figure out where is the best way for CTE, where it's not this watered down education, but that it begins early on. End of elementary, middle school, and they are very much excited about that. The other thing that you should know, they actually answer emails. So if you guys want to push for something, reach out to the federal government. They will answer your emails.
I agree. Vertically, if you look at your State Department of Education website, you can find information there. There are also opportunities horizontally from district to district. There are groups or coalitions that are doing work that's kind of cutting edge on this. For example, if you go to Battelle for Kids, which includes what used to be Ed Leader 21, which was the Partnership for 21st Century Skills back in the late 90s, early 2000s. They're still doing some kind of really great cutting edge work, and so I would say if you connect with groups like the Battelle for Kids, regardless of the state, they're going to be probably doing some interesting things that are very conducive to the kind of interdisciplinary, hands-on, inquiry-based approaches that we're wanting to lift up.
Well, I want to thank you both.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure.